Hey everyone, so in this video what I wanted to do was go over some iPhone 12 Pro leaks and rumours. And as always, my go-to for these kind of things is always Everything Apple Pro. I've been subscribed to him for quite a few years and I've been watching all of his videos. The quality of his videos are really something else in terms of the rendering and all of the 3D CAD models that they actually produce. But what got retweeted onto my timeline was actually a tweet Everything Apple Pro actually retweeted from Joshua. So Joshua Swingle, this is the account that he actually has set up. This also dates back to the original kind of leaks and rumors video that Everything Apple Pro actually did. So what we'll do is we'll go into the initial one, and this is where you have the CAD drawing, 2D CAD drawing, showing obviously some of the features as well as the prospective new bezel size. The bezel size itself, I believe, isn't quite right on this drawing. Somebody did claim afterwards that the bezel isn't quite going to be this thin. It'll be a little bit thicker than that, but it's still obviously a big improvement from right to left on there. But back then, this was the highlight of basically the updates that we were getting. So larger display with slimmer bezels and smaller notch, LiDAR scanner and better cameras with night mode, possible smart connector, we saw that in the renders of Everything Apple Pro's video, louder speakers, louder or better speakers, bigger battery, A14 Bionic plus 5G and iPhone 5 like design. So the update for, well, yesterday technically, but today for me, was this. So even more iPhone 12 Pro details have leaked at Pine Leaks. 120Hz ProMotion display. Now that's something that we've been asking for quite a few years. Obviously, as soon as the ProMotion came out on the iPad Pro, since that day everybody's wanted the ProMotion display on the iPhone. And obviously the issue with the iPhone has always been battery life. So in order to get that display onto a device that is much smaller, battery life on the iPad Pros or all the iPads has generally always been quite good because of the size of the device. But in order to get that onto the phone, obviously it would take more work, and this is obviously something that we'll go into a bit later on. Next one is 3x telephoto camera with improved night mode. So the telephoto photo lens is going to be improved from 2x to 3x, and I'm presuming that's going to be aperture change in order to improve the night mode or to enable it properly. At the moment on the iPhone 11 Pro you can do night mode on the telephoto, I believe, but it doesn't come out very good, and I'm not 100% sure whether it even uses the telephoto lens or whether, as within the past where it would default back to the main lens just cropped in, whether it's actually doing that. Next one is next gen smart HDR. So that's obviously something that we saw the first gen, and in terms of HDR it did actually make quite a big difference. Anybody who's done any type of comparisons against the iPhone 10 or 10s and then onto the 11 will have noticed those incremental years changes. It did actually make quite a big improvement to HDR, both in photo and video. Faster, more accurate Face ID. Now this is something that obviously we've since Face ID's come out, almost like a placebo effect. Every new model that we get, we seem to assume that it's faster. A lot of that could simply be the extra processing power and the speed of iOS compared to the actual physical or hardware changes, because obviously we know that there wasn't any difference between the actual modules themselves. The interaction with the new chipsets, whether that actually made any difference or not, as I say, it could have literally just been placebo. This year obviously they are looking at actually doing something to make that more accurate and faster. Better portrait mode. So portrait mode, obviously iPhones were the first ones that actually came about with this sort of bokeh effect, and originally obviously it was with the 7 Plus where they were actually using both lenses. Since then, using software basically, all of the other manufacturers, Google obviously primarily, have both caught up and gone well beyond the iPhone, and the iPhone last year was actually playing catch up when it came to still photography. So obviously the better portrait mode. Portrait mode is something that I actually really enjoy for kids photos and things like that, and I'm one of the few that actually prefer the telephoto lens because it actually captures portrait photos a lot better than your wide, or especially your ultra wide, because obviously they will distort the subject. The difference between a portrait mode taken in wide and telephoto is quite noticeable, and for anybody who, when you just show somebody randomly the same photo taken in each lens, everybody will like the telephoto lens more. They won't be able to explain it, obviously, if they're not from a technical or photography type of background. I'm personally not, however, obviously I've made use of the cameras very heavily over the years, so as soon as that actually came with the telephoto lens, it was something that I actually really appreciated. I do like having portrait mode on every lens, so obviously there are times when the just the extra light that the wide angle or the standard lens actually brings in does help frame and capture the image compared to what the telephoto would be capturing. Maybe be a bit more grainy, a bit softer, bit more noise in there because of the higher aperture. But obviously portrait mode is something that I do actually use quite a bit, so that's obviously a welcome improvement. Improved autofocus. Now the autofocus itself, this is something that will be touched on a little later on in this video, but autofocus I've always found to be really quite good on iPhones. It's not the fastest. What I've always liked about the iPhones is that you get a gradual change. So when you're going from near subject to far field subject, then it will give you that gradual smooth blur almost, as opposed to that sharp judder change from a subject that's close up to far away. Whenever you see the camera tests online, obviously you get everybody doing the test where they'll put something right in front of the camera lens and then they'll move it away, and in realistic terms nobody actually uses the camera like that. It's good as a basis in terms of knowing how cameras perform in terms of response times and sharpness of how they actually catch focus again, but in realistic terms you don't want that judder in your video. You want it to be smooth, you want it to be gradual. So any improvements on cameras is always welcome, and it's almost expected as well, because cameras obviously with smartphones these days is primarily one of the main things, one of the main selling points. So camera improvements are pretty much required these days as opposed to just being welcome. Next one is better audio zoom. Audio zoom isn't something that I particularly use very much. It's helpful. I have seen examples of it, especially outdoors, mainly because obviously right now, obviously with everybody's situation, nobody's actually making a lot of outdoors kind of travel videos where you might be out in a crowded area. But every example I've seen of audio zoom obviously shows that as soon as Apple actually introduced it, they were by far better than any of the competitors. A lot of the other manufacturers actually probably advertised this type of feature before Apple did. However, when you actually put them side by side, none of them actually could compete with how well Apple actually implemented it. And the final one on this particular list is the navy blue color. The navy blue color, I've actually mentioned in one of my other videos, is something that as soon as you've seen the renders online, it is something that obviously is very different for Apple. We've never seen that on any of the iPhones before, but just the look, and especially if they go along with the stainless steel glossy frame border, the actual chassis of the phone, then I think the contrast between the matte back glass and the glossy frame will be something that it'll just be a really beautiful phone. So that's obviously the gist of this particular text. Now what I did do is, obviously because I got to hear through Apple everything Apple Pro, and then on here you've got the Pine Leaks. So what I did do is I followed this through as well, and what I'll do is I'll just go back to my likes, and so this was the original one that led me onto this one, and then finally it got me down to here, which is Pine Leaks. what I'll do is I'll just go right back up to the top of this particular thread. So this is pretty much working both ways. So this is bouncing off everything Apple Pro and then getting back to Pine Leaks again. But it's got a few more details in here. So what we'll do is we'll go through these. So the iPhone 12 spec report just went up with everything Apple Pro. Here are some of the highlights. iPhone 120Hz iPhone Pro series is being tested. Display calibration is hard, and unless Apple can perfect it, they won't do it. They won't do 90Hz, 120Hz, or nothing. So essentially this is, and it comes on to the next tweet as well. Apple is working on dynamically switching between 120Hz and 60Hz. Depending on what you're doing, have open. 120Hz is a huge battery drain, and we have seen this with pretty much all of the Android manufacturers who have given you 90 or 120Hz displays out of the box. The majority of them actually come in 60Hz, sorry. So they're not switched up. They give you the option to actually switch it and have a faster refresh rate, but battery takes an absolute hammering when you do this. Obviously we've seen Apple on other devices, the Apple Watch for example, where they've done variable refresh rates on the Apple Watch and they've got it down to 1 Hertz in order to give you an always on display whilst conserving battery life. And I would expect them to do something very similar here. So anywhere where it's actually relevant, and I believe the Apple iPad Pro at the moment as well does a very similar thing where it's not constant 120 Hertz. It'll give it you when it deems it necessary or required, and basically anytime when you're not going to require it or you're not going to appreciate it in that particular scenario, that app, whatever it may be, then it makes sense to pull it back down and basically just save a bit of battery life. The battery will need to get larger, coming on to the next one. The battery will need to get larger because of this. 120 Hertz is again a huge battery drain. For battery to even be acceptable, Apple needs to physically larger batteries. Optimization can only do so much. So yeah, being someone who has upgraded their phone every year since I went from the 7 Plus to the 10, and so from the 6S to the 7 Plus, from the 7 Plus to the 10, then to the 10S, then to the 10S Max, and now onto the 11 Pro Max. Every single year I've noticed two big things: speed improvements and battery life improvements. The 10 being the only exception because obviously it's physically smaller device, and it probably only just kept up with the 7S Plus as opposed to being an improvement. Whereas with every other device I've upgraded to over the years, I've actually noticed a considerable upgrade, and each year it becomes less and less of a worry for me. My usage, I do a lot of video recording. When I use my phone, I use it very heavily. I do a lot of video editing, exporting, uploading. All of these kind of things take a massive drain on the battery. They put a massive drain on the battery, sorry. And for that reason, over the years, I've generally figured out very quickly in terms of which devices have been good and which ones maybe haven't. And generally, whenever I've done these kind of, whenever I've had a new phone, I've always, over the first few weeks when your usage is heaviest, I've noticed that certain devices, the 10S from the 10 was a big jump, mainly because of the actual physical size and obviously being able to get a big battery in there, but also because of just the speed improvements and the better optimization as well. Similarly with the 11 Pro Max, I noticed a big difference in terms of how relaxed I was when it came to battery life, and part of that was obviously a slightly bigger battery, but it wasn't hugely bigger from what I remember. But the optimization obviously must have been a lot better, because when it came to intensive tasks, the speed was there. It could kick in and get the job done for you. But when you were just poodling about, when you're just scrolling social media, just watching videos, things like that, anything that's not really that intensive, maybe streaming stuff over your Wi-Fi so you're not having to use your 4G or LTE connections, then I found it to be really good. Upwards of, when I first got the device, upwards of 8 to 10 hours on screen time, which is unheard of for smartphones that are having that heavier usage in the first few weeks of ownership, when it's new and shiny, and you basically just don't want to put it down. You want to test everything out with it. So coming on from that, Navy blue is coming and is being tested in a few different shades. It will have the same frosted back glass. The flat sides of the phone are stronger than the previous angle ones. Now this is something that is slightly subjective, but personally I never actually liked the boxy design of the iPhone 5 and 5S's because of the chamfered edges. Now I'm thinking this time around they're not going to have it. They'll probably just have a bit of a rounded kind of shape to the actual corners, but the bezels, if for anybody who remembers owning those phones, if you held it in one hand and you had your little pinky finger underneath the phone, it would dig into your finger over time. So that was something that is good and bad in a way, but nobody can argue the fact that if you've got a shape where you're rounding off all of the sides as they are on from basically the iPhone 6 right up to the 11 Pro Max, all of those years had this kind of rounded blending glass into metal and then back into glass again design. You're losing space. So firstly, you're losing space within it because that rounded edge, you can't do anything with it apart from the volume buttons and the SIM ejection tool and things like that. There's nothing that you can put into those spaces, and it's obviously empty space as well, so you're not actually getting any strengthening from it. Now stainless steel on all of the recent from the iPhone 10 upwards has obviously helped the phone's rigidity and helped it. Bend tests have basically become a thing of the past when it comes to iPhones as a result of that. But the fact that you're getting this kind of sharper design does mean that it is probably going to be more useful in terms of space within it. So obviously that, if nothing else, you can rearrange things and get a bigger battery in there, but also obviously from a structural point of view, it's going to make it a lot easier for them to strengthen the phone if they're not having to worry about these empty spaces in the corners and around the whole bezel, the whole edge of the phone. So the next one down is the Face ID module is being shrunk. It will be moved around to fit everything. Apple will also be working increasing the angles it works at and using a new dynamic zoning algorithm for faster speeds. So we've already seen renders of what this new bezel is going to be, and basically most of the designs point to the speaker actually being pushed up, and then the rest of the modules being pulled together. So it's centralizing them and basically just making the areas tighter. Now the one concern I'd have is how they can actually replicate the audio, but if they're pushing the speaker right up. Most of the kind of competitors in the Android market that have done a similar thing, generally that top speaker hasn't actually performed as well as Apple's tends to, and I don't know whether that is something that they can literally just change the design so then it's channeling the sound, and the opening for the speaker or the earpiece is literally, it can be put further away. So from a design point of view, rather than it having firing straight out, they've got almost like a tunnel effect, and they're tunneling the sound out of this speaker cutout that's not in the position that we're all used to. Phone calls and things like that, it'd probably make it more awkward because you're never going to have your ear there, but generally I don't know anybody who actually uses the phone to the ear anymore. Most people, whenever they're using the phone, tend to just put it on loudspeaker. So that's probably not much of a concern. I'm thinking more in terms of stereo sound and obviously the Atmos effect that the recent iPhones have got. And for anybody who hasn't tested the Atmos effect on the 11 or Pro or the Pro Max, just go out and have a listen to it. Obviously it's never going to be like dedicated speakers in those positions, but it is very convincing in terms of how it actually gives you spatial awareness, and it can project sounds in different areas, something that you would never have expected on a smartphone in years gone by. In terms of the angles and the dynamic zoning algorithm, now that almost points, it's almost suggesting to me that it may be something to do with the actual structure of the image that it's actually pulling. So we know that it doesn't actually pull a 3D image, it'll convert that into data, and then it'll use that data almost like binary ones and zeros, and it'll use that to actually do matches. But it's almost suggesting that maybe at the moment, obviously I've done the test, so I've tried to actually add my face whilst in landscape mode or upside down, and it will scan your face fine, but it just won't add it. Upside down I don't think it works, but I think at one point I did manage to actually scan the face sideways, but it still didn't work. Maybe that's something to do with being able to differentiate between those, because obviously we need to get to the point where, for anybody who makes video, it is so annoying when you unlock your phone and you basically record a video and it's in the wrong format, because basically, and then you've got to flip the whole video because it's recorded in portrait, because by you unlocking it, it's recognized the phone in portrait mode. The fact that you've used it straight in the camera module doesn't seem to affect it sometimes. Sometimes it'll still recognize it as being in portrait mode and record the whole video in portrait. Portrait videos should be banned, by the way. The only time you should ever use portrait videos is to screen record, but that's a whole different matter. So yeah, any improvements to Face ID, speed, angles, everybody complains about it not scanning when it's on your desk. Realistically, in real world usage, I mean, most of those people that complain are literally just looking for reasons to knock a device. The amount of times that you can actually use it where you can't see the device. Yes, I've had it a few occasions where it's been sat on the sofa next to me and I've just lifted it up and maybe it's not quite scanned it. But for the most part, and as I say, this may be a placebo, but for the most part, I've found that even on the 11 Pro Max, for most, probably 90% of the occurrences when I've actually interacted with the phone, it unlocks perfectly fine. The only exception would be like maybe in certain scenarios. That's where I'm hoping, obviously, that this new algorithm, as well as some possible tweaks in terms of the hardware, maybe bringing all those modules into the center, joining them together, might actually help, and it might be give an added benefit without actually being something that they thought of initially. So the next one, the big one for me, because this is the reason I upgrade every year, the cameras are getting improved. They are getting larger pixel sizes with lower megapixel sensors. They've tested 64 megapixel, but it wasn't good enough to make it to launch. They want a full sensor autofocus using dual pixel autofocus before they go to high megapixel counts. So that should suggest to me that they're sticking with 12 megapixels. Or maybe something in between. To be honest, megapixels doesn't really concern me. The fact that they're trying to concentrate on the quality rather than just doing what a lot of the other manufacturers have done and just throw the biggest sensor in there as you can find. We've seen over the years, Sony was doing this many years ago, where they were giving you 100+ megapixel sensors, and the pictures that came out there were garbage. Similarly with the video, nobody is touching Apple when it comes to video on a smartphone. So obviously I'm trusting them to do what they believe is right, but I'm hoping that we do get a big bump in video performance. LiDAR is going to be there, and it's going to help with autofocus speeds in low light. This is something that's very important to me, as a normal sensor can't do it well. Subject detection in extreme low light will improve as well. EIS in night mode is going to be improved to help handheld night mode pictures, so electronic image stabilization. So most of the videos on my channel, you'll have noticed I'm trying to capture, they're normally about my TV, or I've got my TV in the background and it's just framing. And obviously, in order to do that, I don't want reflections in the screen, so most of the time I'll try and put it in a darkish kind of setting. And for the most part, if you've got any image on screen, it will focus perfectly fine. But when you've got a darker image, it will struggle and it'll hunt for focus. So obviously this is something that maybe not for that particular scenario, because the LiDAR sensor, if it's bouncing off a TV, it's just going to give you a flat image. So maybe if it just picks up the whole TV as opposed to everything around it, maybe the wall behind it, maybe I don't know if it's good enough to detect the distance between a TV mounted to a wall or not. But obviously for every other scenario, recording people, recording objects, anything like that, anything that this sensor can be used for is going to be a benefit, because as I think the implementation in the iPad Pro so far, I don't believe it's been used for the portrait mode. And that's something that just doesn't make any sense. If you've got all this extra data, then surely you want to use it, and especially for video. Slow-mo is getting better low light video, but the source didn't mention higher FPS options. So not many people will be aware, but most of the slow-mo videos that we actually get are almost upscaled 720p or 1080p videos. So even if they increase the bitrate and increase the quality of those, the quality that you actually, in terms of your finished product, so the video that you actually see at the end of it, they can still make massive improvements to that. So obviously this is something that can be done without necessarily going to above 240 frames per second. The better low light part is the better low light is part software, part pixel size. So yeah, part pixel size probably does suggest either they're using more of the sensor or the sensors themselves are actually getting better. Night mode is being improved for longer exposure. I'm guessing night mode pics could greatly help astrophotography. So obviously this is competing with what Pixel and Samsung and everybody else is bringing out in terms of that particular gimmick, if you like. How many people actually go out and capture the stars unless they've got a dedicated camera? I think you'll maybe do it once. I personally have used night mode shots a lot, mainly for cars and things like that, but the night mode itself, it is good, so any improvements to that obviously are welcome. White balance is also getting improved. It's much better, which is a good thing, as it did get worse in later iOS builds. Obviously this is going to be software related. LiDAR will be used, as I said, so LiDAR will be used for portrait mode as well. The hardware is also there for portrait video, but it won't be included at first. It could be delayed to iPhone 13 or later iOS 14 update, could be beyond that as well. So yeah, this is, unfortunately, this is something that was actually on my wish list, because we've seen other manufacturers try and do it, but generally whenever they do this, it's more a case of they just want to be first to the punch, whereas generally with these kind of things, as we saw with the bokeh mode, where generally the Apple's implementation, they want to try and perfect certain things before they actually release it. Unfortunately, this is the kind of feature that I can see them having in reserve and releasing next year. We've seen it in the past where Apple have had these kind of things where it was more than possible to release these features, and they've held it off and released it on the following year and made it an exclusive feature of the next year's model, as opposed to being something that they've actually allowed on previous models. Hopefully this will just be something, as it says, that they just release with a future iOS update, maybe a late iOS 14 or something similar to what they did with Deep Fusion, where they release it on the next .1 upwards, so iOS 14.1. But on that one, I'm not holding my breath on that one, because we've seen with Apple in the past that they do have a habit of holding stuff back in order to make the next year's model seem that much better. So the next one is audio zoom. So obviously this is going into a lot more detail in breaking down all of the ones that we saw at the start. So audio zoom is getting more precise with the better beamforming microphones. It's got better on iPad Pro, MacBook Pro, and now iPhone. Now alongside this, what I would actually like is spatial audio. There is an app on iPhone at the moment, a Dolby app, and what it does is it tries to capture Dolby Atmos type sound by utilizing all your microphones. Personally, and this is something, by the way, that I have actually seen an article on, where Apple recently actually submitted a patent where they are looking to use multiple microphones in order to capture a Dolby Atmos type sound. Obviously it's not going to be Dolby Atmos, because it probably won't be certified and accredited through them. It'll probably be something proprietary to Apple itself, but it's pretty much the same thing as DTS or Dolby Atmos, where it's giving you a spatial audio and it's capturing things from left to right, in front of you, behind you. I don't know whether it has the capabilities of differentiating between below and above as well. If it could do that, that would be really, really cool, and that's something that would really, really interest me. With the videos that I capture on my channel, if I could actually show somebody at home what I'm hearing in terms of my Dolby Atmos experience, that's something that I would definitely upgrade for. Not that I'm not going to anyway, but obviously the more we get, the better. Next gen smart HDR is getting improved, and it will be on all 4 iPhone 12 models. It will be better noise reduction in semi-low light. So basically you've got smart HDR, and that's also deep fusion. So smart HDR works in good light, deep fusion kicks in semi-low light, and then obviously your night mode, which we're coming on to, kicks in on low light. So night mode is being extended to the telephoto camera. The telephoto is also being tested with 3x optical zoom. They are trying for 25x to 30x digital zoom, but it depends on how good it can be. Personally, I'm not a fan of digital zoom. You're literally just cropping. We can do that after the fact. The only benefit of cropping in this way would be some sort of processing, and I have seen, having used several video and photography apps over the years, iPhone 11 Pro Max was prime example, where Halide, the app, if anybody who's familiar with that particular app, they actually released a update. They do it every year pretty much whenever the new device comes out. And I remember reading something on their review of their particular app, and in comparison to what they could do compared to the standard camera app, and also being a more professional based application, they go into things in a lot more detail. But they did, I remember a line in their particular review where they said there's certain things, certain magic tricks, and certain tricks that Apple are actually doing in the background that they don't know what they're doing, so they don't know how to replicate it, but it does make the Apple photos and the Apple video seem to pop, seem to have a little bit more of a sharpness and color and contrast, and they're not 100% sure what it was that Apple were doing, but obviously they're doing some magic behind the scenes. And I remember them calling it just the Apple magic, and that's obviously something where maybe they can implement it into this digital zoom in order to try and improve what it is that you're actually focusing on. But to be honest, digital zoom is something that really we need to get to the point where, even if we have to have 5 lenses on the back of the phone, just give us more optical zoom options as opposed to the digital zoom, because digital zoom is always, no matter what the situation is always going to be slightly worse unless you're starting off with a base. So unless your actual your telephoto lens is already zoomed in, so maybe it's a 5x or a 10x optical lens, if that's your starting point, then obviously the digital zoom beyond that is always going to be better than something that's starting on a 2x or a 3x. But for the most part, digital zoom, if they make an improvement, it's a welcome addition, but it's not something that I'd really be that concerned about. Ultra wide field of view won't change and won't have night mode. Ultra wide cameras get less light due to the nature of the ultra wide lenses. Now that's something that I hope they do actually try and improve the aperture on the ultra wide. This is something that I would actually like. The ultra wide lens is one of my favorite lenses to use. However, for most of my videos you'll notice that I don't actually use it, primarily because you just cannot get enough light in the settings that I use for it not to either become really soft or really grainy. You can use external apps, Filmic Pro, things like that, where you can set everything manually, so you can set your ISO and everything manually, but you end up with a really grainy image. Apple's built-in camera app is very, very good in terms of giving you the best possible picture, whilst not maybe necessarily giving you the same thing that Filmic Pro can do, where it gives you the 100 megabits per second. But I would like to see some improvements in terms of low light with the ultra wide. So the next one is iPhone 12 photo typing will end soon. Late May actually should get more accurate CADs and leaks starting. Oh, prototyping, sorry. So yeah, basically saying that they're nearly there. They're nearly there. As for WWDC, AirPod Studio headphones should be releasing for about $250. As we've seen below, its correction is $350. This is John Prosser said. Craig is also working on more demo videos for iOS and iPad iOS 14. So that's pretty much all of the run around that we follow when we're following these kind of leaks and rumors. But essentially what it's doing is, if these, and obviously you have to take it with a little bit of grain of salt, and if these are leaks as opposed to just rumors, then there's some really impressive things in there, and some of these are obviously things that I'm one of those that is always going to upgrade, but it just makes that upgrade more impactful. I'm not one where I need to justify doing the upgrade. The upgrade for me is my it's almost like a little gift for all the hard work that you put in throughout the year. It's also very important for me for video advancements. This generally is my primary photo and video camera for all of the memories and everything that I capture of family, kids, all that kind of stuff, travel videos, all that kind of stuff. So for that reason, I generally upgrade every year mainly for the camera, but everything else that comes with it is just a bonus. Right, so coming to the end of the video, what I'm hoping to do is just try and do these periodically until we get some sort of official announcement. I'm hoping it's September time. I'm hoping the actual event isn't delayed because of COVID. However, anytime I see any updates like this, and generally it's probably going to be surrounding everything Apple Pro, because he is probably the number one when it comes to these kind of things. But I'm hoping to try and make these periodically. So if you have enjoyed this video, obviously give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already done so, subscribe and hit the bell icon. I have a lot of videos coming. I generally try and upload, I try and release one video a day, just to give enough content for everybody. There's various different types of content in there, ranging from tech to travel, and I'm hoping some other things as well. So obviously I'm trying to grow the channel as much as possible, so if you could subscribe, and obviously if you could share the channel as well as obviously my social media accounts as well. I do my best to reply back on YouTube, but what I am finding is obviously the YouTube Studio app isn't great for sending through notifications, and generally there can be a bit of a delay. So obviously, whilst primary port of call would always be post in the comment section below. If you do have a quick question and you want to just drop it on social media, generally Twitter is the best place. Instagram generally I'm only using for awareness and putting out the videos and everything out there. Twitter is probably the best place, or the YouTube comments. That's the best place to actually contact me if you had any questions.